a DMR radio. The most popular radio out there is the TYT MD380. They go for anywhere from $79 to $99, depending on who's got what on sale. They come in a monoband radio, pick VHF or UHF, but at that cost, it's still a good deal. TYT and a few other vendors have come out with, and Mr. Parker's got one here, a TYT 2017. If you have about 170 bucks and you want to throw it away, go buy one of these. $110. I would rather spend $160 and buy two MD380s than buy this radio. Be very careful. There are a lot of cheap radios that are coming out very fast, that are full of bugs, and are not worth the money. Some limitations of radios. This is the TYT MD380. Decent radio, 70, 80 bucks. It has a channel selector on top. It's limited to 16 channels. It's a limitation of the radio. And there's zones, but because it is a mechanical switch, it stops. It's 16 slots. So it's not really 16 channels. I said that wrong. 16 positions, and there's multiple zones, and you can change zones and have 16 channels per zone. Mr. Parker's radio.
Are you going to whine about the track?
I am. What is really bad about this radio is it's got this trackball, and this is how you change channels. And if you don't like the track, there's no channel selector up here. If you don't like the trackball, it has these two neat little switches. If you update the firmware, you can change channels by going with these up-down switches. Because there's not a mechanical stop on this radio, that's 16 positions, this radio can have 250 channels in a single zone. But this cheap radio made in China, don't get it. With these up-down buttons, I am sure the mean time between failure on these up-down buttons, if you decide you want to use them, is not going to hold up very well. Also, the nice antenna they put on here. There's a little capacitor in here, and if you hold it the wrong way, it doesn't make contact very well. It's all over the internet. Anytone's put out a radio that does have a channel selector. The reviews are mixed on that. Again, the one thing that's for sure, you can buy a nice little Motorola radio, and they are just the workhorses of the industry. You're going to pay about 3 or 4 times. Or these TYT MD380s. These seem to be the standard right now, and they did a decent job when they came out with this. So I'm going to get off my soapbox about the TYT MD 2017 that no one's going to go out and buy. If you do, please don't ask me for any help if you have any questions. You're not going to get it. Don has worn that out. So programming a radio, this is a little challenging for many people. There are some key terms. I'm going to go through the terms. Some of you may get this right away, some of you may not get this right away. When I go through the terms and you have the definitions, I also have a lot of screenshots that I'm going to go through. And it might start making a lot more sense how these terms and what they mean when you start seeing them actually being applied. I'm going to make the slide deck available to everyone. I encourage you to sit down with the slide deck, sit down with a code plug that someone else has already written, and start making changes to it and playing with it. Before you do, and I'm going to say this a bunch of times, make sure you back up what you've got on that radio that is working before you start modifying. So when you make a mistake, and you will, you can go back to a good, known working state. Each radio needs to have the documentation that says a unique DMR user ID. I've changed that to a semi-unique user ID. The real issue with the DMR user ID is if you have 2 radios with the same DMR user ID on the network at the same time, it causes confusion on the network. It's like having 2 machines with the same IP address on the network at the same time. It doesn't know where to send it. It will receive, however, just fine. So thinking you've got 5 radios and you need 5 IDs is wrong. And once upon a time, they used to let you have 4 or 5 IDs. Now they are limiting you to 2 IDs. And they've also rechanged the naming scheme, so you can append a number after your ID to get another 10 radios if you need it. I'm not sure how that all works yet. I've read about it. I haven't tried it. In order to get your DMR user ID, if anybody's thinking about getting one, to sign up for an ID now. You can go to this website, again, you'll have a copy of the slide deck, and it'll take typically less than 24 hours and you'll have an ID. Next term you need to know is talk groups. What is a talk group? And different radio programming software call talk groups different things. In the TYTMB 380, they call it digital contacts, but it is what we call generically a talk group. There's two types of talk groups. There's a group call and there's a private call. The group call talk group is a way of getting people that want to talk together on the repeater without having to make everybody else that's listening to that repeater hear the chatter. So and examples of talk groups, currently the standards are talk group number 9. And again, if I'm losing some of you, just stick with it, because when you start programming the radio, this will make sense. I'm starting to see some people staring at me like, what am I saying? Just bear with me. Talk group 9 has become the standard. If I put my radio on channel 1 and it's set to talk on talk group 9 on this repeater, it means when I key it up, only people that are listening or subscribing to talk group 9 are going to hear my conversation. Also, talk group 9 is not going to spread to every other repeater in the region. Remember I said there's this worldwide network that the access bridges define what that repeater can do when it's accessing the network. That is done through talk groups and time slots. So talk group 9 is typically local repeater only. Talk group 2 is more of a metro type talk group. People that are listening on talk in this area, for example. You've got the WHCRS, the Cincinnati FM Club in northern Cincinnati, which is a very high profile UHF repeater that's subscribing to the K4 USB network. WHBLV out of Middletown. I've got a couple repeaters here. The Miamisburg Wireless Association just put up a very high VHF repeater in the area, and there's 2 repeaters in Springfield. If you're listening on talk group 2, and the radio is set up, you will be keying up and you will be in a little metro area network talking to anybody that is also subscribed to that talk group, or they'll be hearing you. They can decide if they want to talk to you. 3139 is the talk group number that's been assigned for Ohio State. So all the repeaters in Ohio that are subscribed to 3139, when you key up a radio, you'll be keying up all those repeaters. 3169 is Midwest Regional. There's talk group number 1, which is worldwide. Number 3, which is North America. 13 is worldwide English. I don't know what worldwide Germany is, but there's a worldwide Germany talk group with another number on it. Again, bear with me. We talked about there's 2 types. There's a group call. There's also private call. A lot of people have a hard time understanding the difference. Private call is really simple. Private call, I have a DMR ID number, 313-9149. If I were to talk to Charles, who's filming this, or Jim, and I key up my radio, that radio is going to display 3139149. If his radio is programmed, his radio specifically is programmed with Jack, WB8SCT, and where it says talk group, we put my number, 3139149, space, and make it a private call. When I key up my radio, his radio will display whatever alpha tag, which would be my name and call sign, or my call sign and name, however you put it in. There are databases you can download from the internet that has everybody's contact information, so you can see everybody's user ID and password. These radios have limitations, and some of them may be how many talk groups. There are some that can handle up to 1,000. There's others that can handle up to 150,000. So you have to know your radio's limitations to have your expectations set. But again, these TYTs do a really fine job and cover. It's a great starting radio. The private call can also be used to send text messages. You can send text messages on these radios. And there's something in the reflectors and steering in the D-Star world with DMR Plus, and I'm not going to go into it, and I haven't played with it. You can actually start doing that as well by using the private call ID and getting one repeater to talk to another state's group, and people are starting to use that. starting to hear a lot more traffic for those that have DMR from out-of-state people. Some of them are using hotspots, some of them are using DMR Plus. Confusing stuff. In the TYT, we have something called digital receive groups. Sometimes it's just called a receive group. The top group, when you program a channel, is the top group that radio is going to transmit on. The digital receive group is, when you program it into a channel, the top group that the radio is going to listen to. These radios are commercial, they're highly programmable and configurable. You can have multiple top groups in a receive group. You need to be careful if you start experimenting with it, because you might be listening to the local repeater and your radio might be programmed to local 9, but you'll hear traffic from Ohio State or Midwest or a whole slew of others. Before you key up, just because someone called you, the proper etiquette on DMR, if I'm calling N2OJD, Mark over here, I would say N2OJD, this is WV8STT on top group, and I give the number in my call to him. That way he knows how to contact me back. His radio might be listening on everything available, and he's going to hear me, but he's not going to know how to call me back unless I tell him, or unless he looks at the radio, or unless you have a new hacked version of the TYT that tells you the last heard. Color codes, more confusion. Color codes are very, very similar to PL tones, CTSS, and DCS. Color code 1 is the default. You should never have to change from color code 1. The reason we have color codes is the same reason we have PL. We have multiple repeaters that might be in the same region, and you might get overlapping and you don't want to hear the interference. So you set your color code to a different color code than another nearby repeater, and that repeater will then respond to the color code it's listening to. Again, the default is 1, it's not something you want to change, and I'm going to show you a website where you can find out what repeaters are in the area and how they're configured. Bear with me, good stuff's coming. Admit criteria, I told you good stuff was coming. It just keeps getting better. You asked for it. And again, it will make sense. Admit criteria. Typically, if you are on a DMR repeater, you want to program your radio to be color code free. Means it's listening for the color code that the repeater is set to. If you're using a digital simplex channel or an analog repeater or analog simplex, you want to set the admit criteria to always. If you set your radio to always on a DMR, it will work, but you're not going to know if you're keying up on top of someone else. The admit criteria helps keep things light and clean. And when someone else keys up, the repeater is going to ignore you. You're not going to know it's ignoring you. If you have the admit criteria set properly, it won't let you key up. The radio is talking to the repeater, and the repeater is talking back to the radio via digital communications that we don't hear. I had a couple more slides, but it was to try to keep this down to a limited time period to get through all the material. I took those out to show you all that signaling traffic. So again, all you need to know out of this, color code free is the admit criteria. If it's simplex or analog, set the admit criteria to always. Time slots, this keeps getting better. Remember, we are on TDMA. We have 2 simultaneous conversations going on one channel. So there used to be some good standards on what top groups are on what time slots. That's really became confusing as we're ham radio operators, and we like to mix things up and give us some choice, and we're going to go do our own thing and not follow rules. It's what we do. It's how we learn. It's how we grow. But you're going to have to go to a website and find out what top groups are being carried on what time slots if you're going to program a radio from scratch. It's not hard once you get it. It just takes a little while and some playing to get to that point. I mentioned a website, the DMR Mark. I don't write down the actual website, but if you just Google DMR Mark, it will take you to a website, and there will be a section that says repeaters. Click on it, and it will bring up a map of the world. And you'll see those little red bubbles, blue bubbles, depending on what network that repeater is hooked up to. And if you hover over or click on it, it will pop up what talk groups are on what time slots and the frequency of that repeater in the area. I scrolled this down just to show you the talk groups. The top portion is the frequency. We all understand that part. Note, talk group 1 is worldwide on time slot 1. If you go down a bit, most of the local stuff you will find on time slot 2. The big, heavy, long-distance stuff is on time slot 1 typically. Local stuff is on time slot 2. Zones. We talked about zones briefly. Radio limitations. Some of them have 2 zones on some of the commercial gear and can only handle 32 channels, 16 channels per zone. Other radios have 1,000 channels and I don't know how many zones. I haven't done that. What zones do is they hold channels. So again, Don's radio, that's not worth anything, it's got these up-down buttons, so I can program a zone and have 250 channels in it without having to hit a bunch of buttons and go into another zone. This radio, that's decent, good entry-level radio, has got that 16-channel switch up here, 16-position switch, which means I can only have 16 channels in a zone. 1,000 channels, but 16 per zone. So when you program a radio, you need to think about what makes sense. And I'll get through an example. But when I say what makes sense, I've got a zone called JG and my initials. And when I'm on that zone, I've got a couple of DMR frequencies and analog frequencies. And that's where I'm at 90% of the time. So that's why I program that radio. I've seen people just go strictly by programming it for this repeater is on this zone, this repeater's on this zone. Very highly customizable. The more you play with it, the better you'll get. The more you'll end up customizing a radio. And you'll find somebody new that's going to want to get your code plugged and they're not going to understand why you did what you did because it's you. That said, and I've been talking about this quite a bit, radios have limitations. In order to program them, you need to understand what those limitations are. If you're just getting started, you don't need a whole lot to get started. Some of the limitations are, there's actually a DMR radio, that little SL300E, that's only got 2 channels. It's meant for the hospitality market. It's got an up-down button and it's 2 channels. You've got others with 16, 32, 99, 1,000, and I think there's now some hacks out for some of these radios that give you over 10,000. There's the maximum amount of zones you need to understand. You know what the zones do, so when you select a radio, that's going to be a limitation. How many channels per zone, we talked about that. The maximum amount of digital contact or talk groups that you can program in. This is where you get into a limitation of being able to stick the whole database of everybody that has a DMR number into a radio. And maximum amount of receive groups. Most people don't have a problem with that one. So, to program a DMR radio, it can be done in 9 easy steps. And I'm going to get through these 9 easy steps. One is, you have to install the software on your computer. Depending on what radio you get, especially with some of these cheap Chinese radios, it's not going to work. I always recommend, even going to the vendor's website, it's not going to give you a good version. There's a couple of third-party websites. There's a VA3, I forgot his call. He keeps a good repository on his website. I can send you the links, and I think there's Grapevine, which is another very good repository, where you can get decent software to program these radios. If you're lucky, you'll plug it in or put the disk in, it'll install. I always recommend just go to one of those 2 websites, find the radio you want, download the software. The other thing, I was fortunate enough to get an evaluation unit of a TYT MD9600, which is a mobile DMR dual band radio. Total piece of crap also. It came shipped with a disk that did not have the right software, and it came with a programming cable that fit the radio but was the wrong programming cable. So again, if it doesn't work the first time, keep playing with it, but if you get to a point, it may be time to start looking online and seeing what other people are saying, and it may not be your fault. So we install the radio software. If you want, you can plug the radio in, and as I mentioned, back that radio up. That's the first thing you do. And what you need to do in order, well, actually I'm going to go through these slides. I'll just go over the steps real quick. Get your DMR user ID, define what talk groups you want programmed in, the private call and the group call. We talked about that, you know what they are now. The digital receive groups need to be set up, I've got slides on that. Create the channels, put the channels into the zones, then I've got those two backwards, you should back it up, because sometimes when you program the radio, it's the software. So back it up, then program the radio in that order. Let's get started programming the radio. This is the interface you should see if you successfully install the software. Note there is a little plus and a minus sign. The minus sign, like on most programs, will compress everything below it. The plus sign expands it, and there's more information underneath the plus sign. To edit the information that you need to put in here, sometimes you click the mouse on where it would say digital context. Sometimes you would have to right click, and you'll get a pop-up window on the right click. So if something's not working, click on it. If it doesn't work when you left click on it, right click on it. Paying attention now will save you a lot of time in the future. The first thing you need to do in order to be able to program the radio is download what's in the radio. The radio has a basic configuration. When you download it, then you can populate that basic information with all the details that you want the radio to have. So click on the little icon by the big red arrow, and that will get, if you successfully install the software and have the right cable, that will get that information to download onto your computer. If it doesn't work, try it a couple of times. If it still doesn't work, it's probably not you. Go hit the internet and find out what people are saying about it. I mentioned back up the radio as soon as you download that code plug, so as you start making changes to it, and you want to get the radio back to factory default, you can quickly just upload it, and the radio is back the way it was before you started experimenting. Putting your DMR ID into the radio, that is under the general settings. Under the general settings, there are a lot of things. If you don't know what they are, leave them alone. Good advice. Some of the optional things is you can put your radio name in there. I put my call sign in there. There's my 3139149. That is my DMR ID that I'm going to put on this radio. And down at the bottom, there is, when you turn the radio on, an introduction screen. It's perfectly okay to put your call sign and what type of radio it is, or maybe a phone number. If you lose it, someone turns it on, it'll tell someone a number to call to get it back. The rest of this stuff, just leave alone. Trust me. The next important thing, all these radios have some optional buttons on the side, on the front, and you, again, I mentioned these radios are highly customizable. And when you click on, and click on button definitions, and then you will see the screen. And the screen, the buttons have two functions. One is a long press, the other is a short press. On a long press, it does one thing. On a short press, it does another thing. Long press is 1,000 milliseconds. For the engineers in the room, you know that is 1 second. And four very useful functions that I personally find. Again, there's a drop down, look through it, see what makes sense for you. I'd like the top button to be high-low power on my short press. And on my long press, there's something called repeater talk around, extra credit. Who knows what talk around is? Not Mark. Anybody? Extra credit. Talk around. How many know what simplex is? Everybody. Yeah. They call it different things. Talk around is simplex. When you hit a long hit, I'm putting my radio on the output. I'll be transmitting on the output of the repeater. So if I'm out with a bunch of friends, my admit criteria is probably not going to be right. Maybe I can talk simplex with other radios as I'm traveling without having to reprogram and get a cable out to put us on some common channel. Another feature, and I'm not going to go through how to program scan, but scan on and off. And how many know what, not Mark, nuisance delete is? How many of you have a scanner or have your handheld set up to do scanning in your home and you hear all this trash because there's some digital or some RF noise Anybody ever experienced that? Nuisance delete is an awesome feature. It's lockout. You push and hold, and it will lock that out. And it will only lock it out till you turn the radio off and on again. So it resets. So nuisance hold gets rid of. Use this radio, it makes a great scanner. Again, they're monobanders, unless you get what Don got. There's a theme. But there's drop downs, and based on these little drop downs, these radios can do a whole lot of other things with programming this button. Some radios have 6 buttons, the TYT has 2 buttons. Talk groups, and this is where I start to lose people, but we went through the definition of a talk group, and hopefully this will start making sense now. Talk groups are called digital contacts in the TYT. When you open up your talk group screen, you will see this. And you want to start populating this table. And you can add and delete talk groups. I programmed my radio up, WW-1, and contact name is just alpha text. Put in anything you want there. Worldwide, for me, on most of the repeaters I use, is on push to talk mode, which means it's not listening to worldwide unless I key up on it, and then it'll subscribe it to that talk group, and then I will hear that traffic. And after it goes by without so much traffic, it will lock it worldwide again. But worldwide, as I mentioned before, to remember, is talk group number 1. Talk group number 2 is the metro area. I just call it local 2 for me. North America is on talk group number 3. Note the call group. We talked about that. That is how we are going to group our callings. And there's other talk groups. 3139 on line number 10 is Ohio State. This is, if anybody's done structured programming, this is a lot like, you have to give everything a label, if that makes sense to the programmers in the room. So what we're doing here is just defining a lot of labels, but you got to do it. So these are the talk groups, and I've got them labeled as call group. Going down from here, we have private call, and there I've got a couple of DMR numbers, WBSCT-Jack, 313-147-150. Again, if I key up my radio and somebody has that programmed into their radio, they're going to see that information. Again, that gets programmed into the receiving guy's radio, not yours. Because that database is held uniquely in that device, and it can be modified in that device. If someone wants to call me Sparky, they'll program Sparky base with that number. Everybody got that? Okay.
You want to mention Parrot?
I've got Parrot up here, and I'll mention it because Tom brought it up. There are some talk groups out there that will let you key up and transmit audio, then a couple of seconds later, it will send that audio back to you. It's a way to test if your radio is properly working. It's a good tool. Thank you, Don. Wow, you're actually being useful. Thank you, Max said thank you.
Well, that's a first.
It wasn't radio.
What?
It was Don, not its radio.
Okay. That was too late. Okay, moving on. Let's keep going. We have digital receive groups. This gets confusing for a lot. We talked about receive groups, and we talked about setting up a receive group that can hear only one talk group or multiple talk groups. On this screen, and you're going to get used to this, things are rearranged on different types of screens. On the top, where it says group list name, that's just an alpha text. I can call it anything I want. I'm calling this receive group Ohio State. On the left-hand column, these are all the talk groups, group calls that I programmed into the radio. And I can add them, and if they're there, I can take them out with the add delete button. So this is one-to-one. I've got a name, and I've got a talk group that I'm going to listen to, and I'm calling it a, well, TYT, it's a digital receive group. I've created another digital receive group, and I put everything that listens on time slot 2, and I just gave it the abbreviation time slot 2, and I just added things that were interest to me, that if the radio is on and I'm listening to it, I will hear all the chatter that is on those time slots. The radio can only listen to one thing at a time. If the time slot, if the repeater is full, not the, if the repeater's got traffic that it's subscribed to, and let me get this right.